Hey guys, we're going to go over EMS-CEU class. This class is Psych Behavioral Emergencies. In December 2021, you have a class due for Psych and Behavioral. This class in particular is going to be over emergency hold and restraining patients, and this will be worth 30 minutes of CEU. So you can title the 1085 Psych Emergency Hold, put me as the instructor, and turn it in, and you'll get credit for this class. Let's start with, when we're talking about Psych, we're going to start with the mental capacity assessment. So we're kind of going to go with emergency mental hold first and talk about how to determine a person you can do that, how to do that, and then the kind of legal stuff behind restraining people and how to properly do it per our protocol. Okay, so first, mental capacity assessment. In the protocol, you're looking for these kind of four things here. We're going to try to determine these top three. We have to determine that the person is drug dependent, alcohol dependent, or mentally ill. Okay, so for the purpose of this protocol, drug dependent basically means that they've used drugs, and those drugs are influence the way they think and making them not make rational decisions. Alcohol dependent the same way. So let's say somebody's intoxicated and they are choosing to drive their car. You're telling them they can't leave the scene, and they're trying to anyway. That person is deemed to be making a decision that's outside of societal norms. So they're alcohol dependent for the purpose of this protocol. And then mentally ill, that could be depressed, anxious, schizophrenia, any length of those. Okay, so you have to determine that this person is one of those three. That's what we're trying to establish. Once we establish that person is one of those three, we're looking for a key phrase here, which is immediate likelihood of serious harm. Okay, so what that means, it could be threats or actions. They could be suicidal threats or actions, homicidal threats or actions, placing others in danger with their behavior. They're not necessarily tried to kill somebody or tried to kill themselves, but say they're driving the wrong way down the highway. They're placing other people in danger. And the last one there is kind of not a catch-all, but it's something that's really important, is the provider believes that they need immediate medical care. Okay, so that one covers a lot of stuff, but you realize what you need to realize is that in the protocol it has some very specific language, and that language says basically that a reasonable provider deems that they need immediate care. And that immediate care is a life or limb thing. So you can't just say, well, this person threw up and they need immediate medical care for that. That care they need needs to be something that is serious. And that is, your opinion is going to be judged based on the opinion of another medic. So like it would be reasonable that if another paramedic was here, if any paramedic was here, they would believe the same thing you do based on the evidence that you found. Okay, so we're looking to establish these top three, and when we establish these top three, then we need to know this person has an immediate likelihood of serious harm. And what that allows us to do is use what's called emergency mental hold. Okay, it used to be, we would call this emergency detention. We would call it EDO or EOD even. There's kind of different orders for it, but the protocol labels it as emergency mental hold. Okay, so once we've established that there's an immediate likelihood of serious harm, okay, we contact PD, so we want to get PD involved. So emergency mental hold is PD's responsibility per state law. So once we establish that this person meets our criteria and we think they need to be placed in emergency mental hold, we're going to contact PD. Most likely they're already going to be there. We're going to let PD know that these are the things that I found, and I think this person needs to be placed in emergency mental hold, and PD will evaluate your evidence, and they will make that decision to do that. When that happens, in order for that to be valid, you have to fill out what's called a third-party statement. Okay, that third-party statement is in the protocol. They'll also have that third-party statement. PD will have one, and the hospital have one. Most likely, you'll fill it out at the hospital when you arrive. Okay, when you fill out a third-party statement. You have to be detailed about what happened. Saying things such as the patient is suicidal is not enough. You need to describe the actual threats and actions. This is the protocol says, the threats and actions that they committed and who witnessed them, that you witnessed them, and that you use that to make the decision to put them on emergency mental hold. Okay, so PD makes that decision that they're going to be placed on emergency mental hold, and it is now their responsibility to take that person into custody and place them on your cot for them to be transported to the hospital. So we're going to transport the person for PD, but it's their responsibility to make sure that they go. Once it's determined that they're going to be placed on emergency mental hold, that patient no longer has the right to refuse. They cannot refuse to be transported, and PD is their responsibility to make them get on the cot and go with you. Okay, whenever this is going on, obviously, and when we're going to get into that restraint in a minute, we are there to assist PD. We are assisting PD with the transport of the patient because they may need medical care during the transport, and we're also there to assist them with during the restraint, so we can provide chemical restraint measures if needed. So emergency mental hold is one way that you can deal with a psych call. Okay, so we talked about some other ways here. Consent obviously is always best. Okay, so if we can talk to the person what's going on and they're still rational enough to consent to be transported, that's always our best option. And so we always want to try to do that. In the event that you have somebody that is seriously injured, for example, and PD is not, you don't have time to wait for PD to go through this procedure, we can use implied consent. Well, if a person attempted to commit suicide, as an example, and you arrive and that person needs to be immediately transported, they're not going to make it, then you can transport that person immediately based on implied consent, and you don't need to use this procedure because we can assume that if they were mentally stable, they would want us to save their life. So we can use applied consent to that. We can also use applied consent with minors. If you have a minor that's suicidal and their parents aren't available for some reason, you can use that as well. Third there, it says POA, right? So if you have somebody that won't consent and they cannot answer your 8 out of 4 questions, they're not capable of making their own decisions, and they have a POA, the POA can choose to have them transported to the hospital because they are not coherent to make the decisions. So then if we have a POA that has valid paperwork, they can make that choice and have them be transported. They can give us permission. And the last is kind of our trump card for everything. If we run into something and we're not sure on these other things, or we can't figure out how we're going to get this person transported, we have the med control option. Okay, we can call med control and tell the physician at the hospital that we're going to transport what's going on, and get an order for them to sedate them or restrain them and take them to that doctor. So we can do that. A good example of this one, I was telling my guys, we were doing this class. I had a call a long time ago. I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. I had a call and it was a STEMI, and the guy confirmed STEMI is at his house. We found the STEMI, we wanted to take him to the hospital, and he was so claustrophobic that he could not get into the ambulance. I mean, this guy was ready to fight to get into the ambulance. He was absolutely refusing, and I started trying to convince him to get in, explain to him, keep him calm, and nothing would work. This guy was not getting in the ambulance no matter what. So we made a call to St. John's Hospital in Tulsa, which is where we were going to go, and we got permission to give the guy 2.5 Versed, and that calmed him down. And then we got him in the truck and took him to the cath lab and saved his life. Okay, so we could, in theory, use this because this guy is interfering with something that's going to save his life. He's going to die if we don't get into the cath lab. And he is mentally ill because he told me he's been diagnosed with claustrophobia, right? So he has a mental illness, and he's interfering with the need for immediate medical care, and it's reasonable another provider would think so too, because I have a 12 lead with a STEMI on it, an obvious STEMI. So we could have, in theory, used this, but we don't have time for that. So we just go to med control right away and kind of circumvent and get permission. And then after I told the doc, after I got permission from the doc to give the drug, I explained to the guy what we were gonna do, and he consented to that treatment to help him. So we were able to sedate him and then take him. So we start with med control, but we actually ended up getting his consent once we got a doctor to kind of back what we wanted to do. So just examples of how to get somebody, different ones, permissions that we can use. If we're talking about especially emergency mental hold, but also implied consent or even med control, we're talking about restraint, okay? So you hear a lot in EMS school, any type of school, paramedic school, any EMS classes, you hear people talk about documentation. You hear a lot of people saying that the most liability that you'll ever face on a call is a refusal, okay? And I've looked into this and read a lot about it, and this is not true, okay? The most, especially nowadays, because we have so much equipment, whenever your protocol is followed properly and the patient was assessed properly and the call was documented properly, we have checked the patient out, found what we found, and followed our protocols, but the patient still chose to refuse. They have that right. So there's not that much liability to that, as long as the call was ran correctly and was documented correctly. What does hold a huge amount of liability, especially in today's climate with, when you talk about policing, you are seeing this restraint, physical and chemical, either not be done properly or not documented properly, and you're seeing huge amounts of liability carried with it now. There's actually 2 cases going on right now. One is in Colorado, in Aurora, Colorado, with the fire department there. And there's a case going on out in Georgia with a private EMS service. And both of these cases are gonna set a lot of standards for how this stuff continues from here out. And they're both involving ketamine, which we have here at Owasso. Let's start with just restraint, okay? If we choose to restrain somebody physically or chemically, we start with having 3 things that we really need here, okay? What the protocol kind of breaks down in the layman terms is this patient needs to be harmed. They need to want to harm themselves, cause harm to others, which includes you, or disrupting medically necessary interventions, okay? And that third one there can get tricky, right? So going to the cath lab because of a STEMI is definitely a medically necessary intervention. They're going to die. But a person refusing an IV, okay, in only very little cases is that going to be medically necessary, right? So you have to be, that has to be, this comes back to our first one here, another provider would reasonably have to believe. You're going to be judged if you were to get in trouble for this. They're going to look at it and go, explain to me clinically why that was medically necessary. Not just, well, that's what we always do. So we got to make sure if we're going to use that one, that it's actually life or limb situation. Physical restraint. When we do make the choice to restrain people, okay? Just kind of some general tips there. Things that we can and can't do or should be doing. First, it says soft restraints, right? It does not say handcuffs. We always use soft restraints in the ambulance, and those soft restraints need to be placed on the arms and legs every time. That's how they come in pairs, sets, and you're meant to restrain people's arms and their legs. Okay, restraining somebody just by one or the other, especially just the hands, that puts yourself still in danger because the person can kick, but it also puts the patient in a lot of danger if there is, as he or she struggles, they can get off the cot and fall off the cot in weird positions, and their hands are secured, and they can get a lot of injuries to their arms and shoulders if they get off the cot. And you will be held responsible for those. Once you restrain somebody, you are responsible for everything that happens to them because you've taken their freedom away, so you're responsible to take care of them. And if they fall off the cot and tear their rotator cuff because you only restrain their arms, You broke the protocol and you'll be held liable for that. Next, no handcuffs without an officer in the ambulance. So per the protocol, you have to, if you're going to use handcuffs to restrain somebody, if the police are and they secure them to the cot with handcuffs, the officer has to be with you, okay? You used to see in protocols that if you had a handcuff key yourself or you had a way to release those cuffs, that you didn't need the officer in the back, okay? And this is something that's came up in several recent lawsuits and several criminal and civil trials. And it is a really bad idea. If you have not been to a course and been trained on how to work handcuffs, you don't know how to use them, you're not a police officer, then you should not be the one that's responsible to get those off. Because if something happens and you need to get those handcuffs off and you can't, you are not trained in those and you are going to be held responsible for that. One thing on the handcuffs, if you do use handcuffs and the officer is there, those handcuffs should not be behind the person. They need to be secured to the cot. So they'll have to use 2 sets of handcuffs and secure them to the rails just like we would soft restraints. They should not be behind the person because you cannot access their arms in case that person goes into cardiac arrest or you need to start an IV or do something to help that person. They should not be behind there. Also, sitting like that in a cot, that's not how the cot is designed to be used. So if you have an accident and that patient's injured, you're going to be held liable once again because you are not following the manufacturer's recommendations on how to place that person on the cot. Any chemical restraint requires physical restraint. Okay, so this is a very commonly broken protocol. Okay, anytime per our protocol that you use chemical restraints, you give somebody ketamine or Restraint, you must physically restrain them. That's for several reasons. One is in case they wake up and the chemical wears off. You do not want that person to then come off the cot. Okay? So we want to always physically restrain somebody that's been chemically restrained. Last, they're only taken off at the hospital. So once physical restraints have went on, do not let somebody talk you into taking them off or releasing them, no matter how nice they suddenly become, because it could lead to yourself or the patient being injured if they have another incident. Once again, the protocol says do not do that. So if you take them off and then you're injured, they're injured, you're going to be held liable for that because you're breaking the protocol. Last is chemical restraint on that. So chemical restraint is designed to assist physical restraint. Okay, so, and what that means is we can assist police officers with restraining if the police officers restrain somebody, and then we can use the chemicals to sedate them. And then that patient, excuse me, that patient can be moved to the cot much safer so they're not injured. Apologize, guys. So they're not injured. So chemicals are used to assist the physical restraint. Okay. So anybody, it says right here, anyone who's chemically restrained should be physically restrained. It is not required, but due to this bottom here, excited delirium, anybody, in my opinion, that is physically restrained should be chemically restrained unless there's a contraindication. And the reason, because you dive into excited delirium, and I'm going to put a separate class together for that for you guys for information. I just pulled the white paper on it to get the best information, and I'll put one together. But when you dive into excited delirium, the main thing with excited delirium that leads to people dying is that they are physically restrained in some way, and they continue to fight, continue to fight, continue to fight against those restraints, especially after they've had some type of stimulant. Okay, so say a person had, the main thing with excited delirium, the most cases were when using a cocaine, in particular using crack cocaine as a very heavy stimulant on their body, very intense. And then that person is physically restrained, especially when they're physically restrained by law enforcement or physically restrained by EMS and tied down. And then they keep fighting against those restraints, and then eventually their heart stops. Okay, so if you physically restrain somebody and then they have a case of excited delirium, and one of those indications is fighting unreasonably against physical restraint, the indication, that is an indication for chemical restraint. So it is a good idea if you physically restrain somebody and they are continuing to fight anyway, that person gets chemically restrained so that they don't get injured or they don't break the restraints and injure you. So it's safer for you, safer for the patient to use these together. And I'm going to keep up, and we're going to have some classes coming up on ketamine and Versed, the two things we use to chemically restrain, and really break down some indications. And we're going to talk about excited delirium in depth. There's both cases going on that I was talking about in Colorado and Georgia. One's about to be settled in Colorado, and due to that case, it's not even it's a criminal case. The fire paramedics that are there are being held criminally responsible for what happened to the patient, which is a kind of a first in EMS. It's going to be a big deal about how we go forward with this. But the Colorado Medical Directors Association has already issued some new guidelines on ketamine. Okay, so those will probably be coming nationwide before too long. And then when those get out there, we'll talk about it more in detail. But good subject. We've ran into this several times here recently, so I thought we would cover it, and it covers our psych class for the month. If you have any questions about any of this, questions with how this works, or anything explain more in detail, let me know. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.